If you've decided that you want to make a quilt, but you're not quite sure what you need to purchase, maybe you have a limited budget or limited space for the things that you'll need to make the quilt, then you've come to the right place. This is the second video in a series of videos that I'm doing that are talking about the tools that you would need to make a quilt, and kind of the starter things that you might want to start out with versus the additional items that you may want to add to your your toolbox in the future. But really, this is really aimed at where to start. So if you're interested in the video I did previously that talked about the sewing machine and what kind of features you needed on a sewing machine, then refer back to that video for that information. But today we're going to focus on just cutting tools, rotary cutters, cutting mats, and rulers, because I think that that is an area that some people can find themselves spending a lot of money on, and also struggling with the mats and where to put them, how to store them, and that kind of thing. So let's get started. Okay, I want to jump right in by talking about rotary cutters, because when you are making a quilt, your quilt pattern tells you you need certain quantities of fabric, and then from that fabric your pattern will tell you to cut down those larger pieces into the smaller pieces that you'll need to actually make your quilt blocks. So to cut that fabric down, you may find that you would like to use a rotary cutter to do that with a self-healing mat. So let's talk about rotary cutters first, and then I'll talk a little bit about the self-healing mats and some of the features you might want to look for in that. So rotary cutters come in different size blades. This is a 28mm blade, while these are 45mm blades, and this one is actually a 60mm blade. So you can use these different blades depending on what you're cutting. Some people just like the larger blade when they're cutting yardage down. I prefer to use this when I'm doing something that's very thick, where I'm laying a ruler on a thick fuzzy fabric, maybe that kind of thing, where I need the extra depth. I'll use the 60 for that. The 45s are the ones that are my go-to, and I have over the years purchased different styles of rotary cutter, trying to find the one that works best for me. And although these are nice cutters, and I don't have a preference on brand, and I don't have any affiliates with any of the brands, I find that these are the two that I go to the most. And the thing that I like about these rotary cutters is that when I push the blade, when the blade is out, I can cut, I can have this, and I can cut with this hand, but I can also change hands and cut with this hand with this rotary cutter, and I don't have to change anything about it. I tend to cut with both hands. I'm left-handed naturally, but I do tend to cut with both hands. With a rotary cutter like this one, where I do like the feature that you squeeze it for the blade to come out, and it's really a good way to keep the blade from cutting you or getting, causing any issues. And then when I release it, it goes back in and it's protected, and there's no one to get cut. What I didn't like about this blade was I like to have my blade next to the ruler that I'm cutting with, and I'll show you that in a little bit. With this one, I can cut with one hand because that's the way I've got it currently mounted, but I can't cut it with the other hand because then it won't be next to the blade or next to the ruler. So I'll show you that in a little bit. So this is not my favorite just because I do cut with both hands. If you cut with just one hand, this one would work fine. You just mount it on the side that you need it for left-handed or right-handed, and you're ready to go to town. So, and that is an Olfa brand. This one is a Fisker brand rotary cutter, and it works fine, but it's got a little lock on it, a safety lock. So, and it's again one that you squeeze for the blade to come out, which is a great safety feature. But it's also one of those that I can't switch hands with, so it's not one that I tend to use. But I do like that it has the lock on it, So if the lock is pushed in that direction, I can open it. If I press this button to that direction, now it's locked and it can't be opened. And if you've got kids in the house, this will be something that you're really interested in. But with my Olfas, I can pull this down, my blade is exposed and I can use it, and then when I'm done, and I try to practice every time I lay it down, I just push that back up, just so I don't walk away and forget it, because I have a grandchild that comes over every day and I don't want him to get curious and cut himself with these. So the rotary cutters, this rotary cutter, let's talk about this one for a minute. This rotary cutter is 28mm, and I don't typically use this one unless I'm cutting small areas. I'll show you an example of a ruler that I use this with. This is what I call a specialty ruler, and this ruler would get laid down on a piece of fabric edge, and then the blade would be exposed. So the blade would be exposed and it would ride in the channel of this ruler to cut the fabric. A larger blade wouldn't fit in there as well. It would be more bulky and harder to work with, whereas this small 28mm blade would work really well. And I will show this in just a minute and kind of show you. Well, let me show you now how this works. So I have a mat and I have a piece of fabric here. This is a fat quarter. I would normally have pressed this so I didn't have any seams in it, but I just pulled this out of the stack. And then I lay this specialty ruler on the fabric, and I've put that, I don't know if you can tell, there's a black line that goes across here, and I can put that black line on the edge of the fabric, and I'll scoot it over here, save a little fabric. Put that line on there, and then I can take this 28mm blade, expose the blade, put it in to the crease, run around this ruler with this, and then I have, if I had cut it down in strong enough, probably need to replace this blade. I have now created a perfect circle. So this is an example of using the smaller rotary cutter in these smaller, more specialty rulers to get it to go through that channel without a problem. And I need a new blade in there, and I'll show you the blades in just a second. So this is another example of a circle that we've created. In this case, obviously that one's come out of the middle, but it's creating perfect circles. So this is what I call a specialty ruler. This one is Easy Quilting at www.simplicity.com. Again, I'm not affiliated in any way, but this is a ruler that I've used to make circles in the past. So I have that one. So that's an example of when I would use this smaller one. And this particular Fisker brand has refill blades that come in a small pack. I pick them up at Joann's when they're half price, that kind of thing. So, and then I'll also show you how to replace the blade. In this particular cutter, you loosen the screw on the back side, and I'm holding my finger on there because I don't want anything to just fall out here. So I take this screw out on the back side, lay it down, and now I can lay down that, and I can take that blade out, which I'm careful not to put my fingers on the edges of it, but I can take that blade out now and put a new blade in, and then put this back in here, and I hold it with my finger and then screw this back on. So this is how this particular blade gets replaced, gets put on and off. Okay, so let's look at one of the other, this is Fisker brand. Let's look at one of the Olfa, and this is one of the other reasons why I like this particular cutter is the way that the blades are changed. So in this case, I turn this over and push on this red, or pull on this red piece, and when I do that, this pops out. Then I can easily get this blade off without touching the sharp sides of it, get a new blade, and then I put that new blade in there, press down on this and push this back out, and I'm done. So it's a little easier to work with To me, I like that particular method for replacing the blade, as opposed to this method where I have to unscrew the screw and work with it that way. The same with this one. You're unscrewing the screw, letting that blade drop out, and then replacing the blade. So, and the blades come in replacement packs. This is 60 millimeter Fisker brand that goes into this particular cutter. This is 28 that goes into this particular cutter, and this is an Alpha brand for the 245s that I prefer. But will say that you can buy these if you just look at the blades that you're replacing and look what the center looks like. You can find replacement blades of different brands, and I more recently bought this particular brand. And I haven't tried it yet. I don't know if it's going to last as long as the Alpha brands do, but I'm going to try them because they were less expensive on Amazon than the Alpha brand blades. And when you cut, like you saw me cut here, and I had the little places that didn't actually cut, when I start having that problem, that's when I know that I've used the blade to the point that it needs to be replaced. And rather than fiddle with it and trim things and try to make that work, to save a blade, I go ahead and change the blade. That's why I was looking for a less expensive option so that I could change those blades as often as I needed to without any concerns. There are many other rotary cutters in different brands. There are some very fancy ergonomical cutters and that kind of thing. I have never tried to switch to those blades just because these are kind of a second hand for me. I've used them so much that I'm real comfortable with using them, because some of the new ones have very different shapes than these do. So I like these. So let's talk about mats, because when you're using these rotary cutters, you really must use a mat that's made for rotary cutting. So, and usually those mats are called self-healing mats. So this is an example of an Alpha brand mat, which is the same brand as the cutter, but it's not necessary that they be the same brand. This mat is 12 by 18. I don't typically use this small of a mat when I am cutting down yardage. You can buy them Joann's, online, anywhere, and they'll work really well. They will get, this one you can tell has had quite a bit of use. They will get little nicks in them, and dirt will get down in the cracks after a while. You can wash them. I've seen videos where people are putting them in the bathtub and washing them with soap to clean them and rejuvenate them. I tend to use them until I just can't use them anymore, and I throw them out and get another one, because I watch Joann's for half price times when I can get these at a discount. This other mat that's laying here, this is a 24 by 36 mat, and I use this mat most often. This mat is large enough for cutting yardage. It usually meets all my needs. I have 2 of these mats, and I butt them back to back on my table so that when I'm piecing or whatever it is that I'm doing, I know that the spot I land on my table I can cut on, and I don't have to make sure I'm on or off of a mat. So the 24 by 36 is my favorite size. So it really depends on, you know, how much room do you have? What is your sewing space like? I'm very fortunate in that I have a studio here, and I have a table that I can leave set up. I can leave my mats out, my rotary cutters and all that, and then come back to a project that I'm working on. But if I go to a quilt retreat or anything like that, I will take the smaller one, and I can make that one work. Okay, so the next thing to know about these mats is they do have numbers on them, and when you're cutting fabric, you can put your fabric on here and measure where you need to cut using the numbers on the mat. But when you buy your mat, take a minute, and this is one of the rulers, and we'll talk about this later. Take a minute to take one of your rulers and put it on your mat and make sure that the measurements on your mat are accurate. And some of the other brands of rulers or mats, sometimes those numbers are on there, but they're not accurate. And when they're not accurate, then you run the risk of cutting pieces in a way that won't work out. But the other thing is, when you're using rulers, what I do is I ignore the numbers on the mat and focus on the rulers and the numbers on the rulers, so that I don't try to line it up. You know, I'm not trying to line up a piece on 1 inch by 1 inch and then trying to put my ruler on there and cut a 2-inch square or a 4-inch square, whatever it is. I will usually have my fabric on here and I will cut what I need to cut with my ruler, and I won't use these. But there are times that you can use the numbers. You just have to make sure that they're accurate before you start. I will show you 2 other what I call specialty mats that, depending on the kind of work that you're doing, you may want to invest in. I did not invest in these 2 specialty mats until much later in my quilting, and it was because of a particular project I was working on that I did go ahead and purchase those. So this is an example of a mat that is self-healing. It is 7 by 7. This mat will spin. So it's just very simple. It's just notched out with a notch here on the base. The base has got a pad on it to keep it from sliding, and then it has this round piece and this piece cut out here. And then I have a larger one. Same thing, it's a Fisker brand. It works in the same exact way. So that's cutters and mats. So now let's talk about rulers. Rulers are an addiction. In my mind, rulers are an addiction, because I have 4 or 5 rulers that I use all the time, and they work very, very well for me. I'm used to them, I know how they work, and I use them all the time. But then I have other rulers that are a little more specialty rulers. Tons and tons and tons and tons of rulers, tons of brands. I will show you just here for the longer rulers. There are Creative Grids, Omni Grids, Fiskers, Omni Grip. There's all sorts of brands of rulers. And you really want to take a look at the rulers to see what works best for you. Like, I use this ruler all the time when I am doing anything that is yardage, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But the thing that I like about this ruler is clear in the mark, where the cross points are. So right here where these cross points are, it's clear. So when I put fabric on it, I can see my fabric underneath. So I know I'm spot on for an accurate cut when I'm cutting fabric for a quilt. This one is the same. It's got a hollow little spot so you can see and know that you're right on the spot. This one is even a little better because it's got the yellow markings on the sides, and then this spot where you can see in the middle. This ruler is good because it has a 45-degree angle, a 60-degree angle. So you have some angles there, and there are times when you'll want to cut using those angles. So there's another one. This one is Creative Grids, and this is one of the first Creative Grids I had purchased. I like it, but I have a love-hate relationship with it. And that's because this ruler has white numbers. This ruler, first of all, is 6.5 inches wide and 12.5 inches long, which is great when you're working on seam allowances. There are times when that 1/2 inch is great to have. However, for instance, right now, what's right side up for me are the white letters, the white circles, right? So this is a 1. This is telling me that from this edge to here is 1 inch, right? So I have to make sure that I'm using these white bubbles when I hold the ruler this way. But if I turn this ruler around, now I have to make sure I'm looking at the black bubbles, because now 1 inch is from here to here, because there's this 1/2 inch on this ruler. So I like it because it has more capability using the 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch seam allowances, but I struggle with it sometimes because I've got to consciously stop and think that I'm using black bubbles versus white bubbles. The other thing I like about the Creative Grids rulers is they come with this textured material on the back of it, because you'll find when you put these acrylic rulers on top of fabric, they want to slide, and I'll kind of show you that in a minute. And the grippy things prevent that and make them stay firm on the fabric. So I like that for these, but for the rulers that I bought that didn't have the built-in grippies, I just use a tape. It's a medical tape for taping on medical bandages. I buy it in Walgreens, Walmart, anywhere. And I just put some of it on the back, and now that ruler will be a little more grippy for me. Okay, so these are the long rulers that I use. Let me show you how I would use these in practice. So this is I think it's 2 yards. It's 2 yards of fabric. I would have probably pre-washed this and ironed it before I got to the point of cutting it, but for this demonstration I kind of wanted to show you yardage and how I work with yardage. The first thing that I do is I line up salvages, and I probably say selvage wrong. I think it's selvage, not salvage, so I think I did a previous video about it and pronounced it wrong the whole time. But I will hold this up, matching those selvages together. That fold was folded really nicely, okay? And then one way to do it is, let's see, let's lay this way. So if you've got a big enough mat, you can definitely lay this out this way. And I will take this ruler because it's long enough to reach across. And what I typically do is on the 1-inch mark, I will line up, and again, this is where I can see that my fold of my fabric is perfectly on that line. And I would line it up along this end, and this is where the grippy comes in. So if I want to square this up so I know I've got a nice 45-degree angle, very nice and straight, I would put pressure on this, open my rotary cutter. I would have the blade exactly next to the ruler. That's where I want this side of the blade to be. So I hold my hand on there firmly, I push down, and I cut, keeping it right against the edge. And then when my cutter gets to about the point of where my fingertips are, stop cutting, pick it up, and move my hands, because I want firm pressure, because if I leave my hands back here, by the time I get down there, it will slide like that because I've put pressure on it as I've gone across. So I will keep this lined up. I will keep it lined up along this side, like this. And then I will continue across and cut. And that's how I will square a piece up. Now, another way that I do it, only because sometimes, depending on the fabric that you're working with, when it gets out there, it can get kind of pulled and stretched. So another way that I will do this is to have my salvages match up, make sure that it's good on the bottom, and then I will fold this in half, keeping them nice and straight. I want everything to lay flat. I don't want any wrinkles anywhere. So I will fold it like this, and then when I do that, I can use this ruler, again, lining up my ones. But I don't know if you can see this in the video, but if you look at this one, I can line my lines up and I can see that my fabric is exactly on that line, but I can't see at the diagonal, and that's the difference in a ruler like this, where I would be able to see in this ruler, I can see the intersections that I'm exactly on spot. On this ruler, I have to look at it a little different. So this is a nice ruler. I like the ruler, but it requires a little bit different technique when using it. So I can lay this on here, and again, and in this case, I don't have to lift my hand and move it down because it's a shorter space. So that's another reason why I like this ruler. And it's not gonna slippy slide. And I don't know if I even have a ruler that doesn't, this ruler doesn't have anything on the back. And if I put this on there, this one slides around really easy because there's no There's nothing on the back to grip it. Okay, so two most used rulers for me, 24 by 6 and this 6.5 by 12.5. Although I have a love-hate relationship with it, I do use it. I do use it more often than any of the other rulers. For the quilt that I was doing with this, I had this lined up and I was cutting 5-inch strips, and then I was sub-cutting those into 5-inch squares. So I was using this ruler to cut my 5-inch strip. Once I had the strip, I was laying it out here, and then I was going back and cutting across. So this ruler did both things for me. So there may be times when you are trying to do a square, cut a piece of fabric into a square. This one is 7.5 inches. This one is 6.5 inches. This is Creative Grids. This is Fiskars. And this one is 4.5 inches. And yes, I could invest in 7.5, 6.5, 5.5, 4.5, 3.5. I could have one of all of them, and every time I needed a square, I would have the exact ruler. But with something like this, if I need I don't want to cut any more of that fabric up. Let's say I have this and I need a 4.5-inch square. Okay, so I know this line is straight. I can tell that it is straight. But the first thing I can do, let's see, what's the best way to show you without confusing you? One of the things that I would typically do is assure that this is straight in both directions. So I would square it up. Okay. And then knowing that that line is straight, I can take this square and I can line up that side because I know that side is straight. And if this side is straight, that's great, but it's not quite. So I'm going to line that side up, and let's say I need a 6.5-inch square. I can do this. Now I know that these three are perfect, but this one is a little off. So I'll flip that around, and I know that I want to put this on here, and I want to line up the three good sides. And I have just a little bit there to trim. So I will put my, okay, and now I have a 6.5-inch square, which is great. But let's say I need a 4.5-inch square and I don't have a 4.5-inch ruler, which I do have a 4.5-inch. I could take this ruler, or this ruler, and put it on there. I know two sides are straight, and I could trim it down and I would end up with a 4.5-inch square. But if I have this, I can also do it with this ruler. So I can put on my 4.5-inch. So there's a spot on this ruler that shows me the exact place I need to be for 4.5 inches in both directions. And another thing, when you're using a rotary cutter, nice pressure down, and then when you're cutting, you're not sliding it, you're putting pressure down. And you can see I need a blade on this one too. So I have a 4.5-inch square without having a 4.5-inch ruler, which would have been nice to have, but I didn't have it. So I'm trying to show you how you don't need one of every size. You can definitely make a larger one work. I also have this one I use all the time for different things. So this one I can do the same thing. I can put this on there. I can look 4.5 and 4.5, and it shows me right where they should come out, and I can put them on there and I can square it up with this ruler. So point being that a 12.5-inch square ruler might be something you want to add, but you don't necessarily need to add a ruler that's specifically designed for squaring up, because you can square up with this regular ruler. I think I'm going to do a series showing how to use each of the specialty rulers that I have. So watch for that to come up in the future. So if this information was helpful, I know I was kind of long-winded because I use rulers and cutters, and they're kind of important to a good outcome when you're quilting, because if a quilt, if your cutting is precise, meaning that you're cutting right on the lines and you're cutting really true cuts, and your seam allowance is a consistent 1/4-inch seam allowance, you will have great results every time. I hope all this was helpful. If it was, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. If I've confused you with anything that I've talked about today, I'd be glad to talk to you in the comments. Thank you.